po yung pinaka-reaction na natin ngayon, mga ka-reaction, ha. Pakinggan po ninyo, unconstitutional tungan program appropriation, yung tinatawag nilang the most evil.
So let's begin. I have an acronym for unprogrammed appropriations.
Naku, ano kaya yung acronym na yun?
IHUWAS. For me, they stand for I hate unprogrammed appropriations.
Naku po.
And I've already said so in my separate concurring and dissenting opinion in the Pimentel case. There. Where, among others, I bluntly said and wrote, among others, that unprogrammed appropriations in any form are unconstitutional.
Yun, naku po.
My opinion, Madam Solgen, is, in my reckoning, it stands on very solid constitutional grounds, and I'll show you why. The constitutional framework for the national budget is, of course, spread over several constitutional provisions. But hearing from our amicis, specifically former Budget Secretary Abad, it is an accountability framework. And taking that cue from Secretary Abad, it is a rigid budget with purpose-specific spending. Why? Article 7, Section 22 requires the President to submit to Congress within that period of 30 days.
Alright, mga ka-reaction. Ito, nako. Ito pa ang pinakamagandang balita, mga ka-reaction. Nagkakalaglagan na po si Tamba at saka itong si Bangag, o na tinatrabaho na po ni Bojing Remula. Itong si Tambaloslos. Hindi ko alam kung ano to, kung isa sa mga kanilang mga diskarte para lituin na naman tayo. Alright, ito na po, mga ka-reaction. Wag na po natin patagalin.
May sa katunayan, ang notice of disallowance mula sa Commission on Audit ay hindi act o literal na impeachable offense dahil ito lang ay inilabas ng COA dahil nga sa may hindi malinaw na naipaliwanag ang Office of the Vice President.
Nako po! Alright! Reaction TVPS nagbabalik. Reaction! Napakaganda po ng pag-uusapan natin ngayon. Katulad po na narinig ninyo, mga ka-reaction. Yung notice of disallowance, hindi raw impeachable offense. Naku po, ano pong gagawin? Anong gagawin kaya ng mga animales dyan sa may kongreso? Ano kaya gagawin ni Bangag? Naku, ano kaya gagawin ni Bangag, mga ka-reactions? Ni Tambaloslos! Ginamit nila ang kabad ng bayan para ma-impeach si Sara DUTERTE. Wala pa rin nangyayari. Ito po ang kinukuda ng mga dilawang pinklawang umaalingasaw kasama ng mga loyalistang Bangag. Itong notice of disallowance from COA ay hindi daw impeachable offense. Ano pong gagawin nila ngayon, mga ka-reaction? Meron pa tayong pag-uusapan ngayon, mga ka-reaction. Alam po ba ninyo kung ano yung pag-uusapan natin ngayon? Malabo po ang impeachment ni BP Sara. Malabo pa basta malabo. At ito pa, may surprise pa, habang ginigisa si Bangag dyan sa may Supreme Court, yung tinatawag nilang oral argument ng 2025 national budget, na kung saan pinakakurap na national budget. Pinakakurap sa history. Mga reaction, napakaganda ng reaction video na ito. Napakaganda ng video na ito. Bakit kanyo? Ito, meron akong surprise sa inyo bago natin ituloy yung video na yan. Ito po, surprise ko sa inyo, mga ka-reaction. Ako, ito na, nagkakalaglagan na po, mga ka-reaction. Hindi lang laglagan na nangyayari ngayon, mga ka-reaction. Talagang todo kamalasan na nangyayari po Todo kamalasan na nangyayari kaya sa dalawang magpinsan na yan. Breaking news. Ano itong breaking news na yan? Breaking news. Ayan. Breaking news. Hiniling ng Office of the Ombudsman sa Anti-Money Laundering Council na ma-freeze ang mga asset ni dating House Speaker Martin Romualdez. Ayon kay Ombudsman Jesus Crispin Remula, ito ay may kaugnayan ng umano'y money laundering. Hindi rin suportado ng Office of the Ombudsman ng hiling ni Romualdez na makapagpa-check up sa Singapore. Kasama si Romualdez sa nasa immigration look bulletin order. Look bulletin, bakit hindi anong tawag doon? Yung all departure order. Bakit look bulletin lang? Mga kareaksyon, anong nangyayari sa dalawang magpinsan? Nagkakalaglagan na nagsimula po yung oral argument. Ito pong si Crispin Bonjing Remula, hindi na niya alam kung anong gagawin niya para mapagtakpan itong si Bangag. Handa po nilang ilaglag itong si Tambaloslos para lamang mapagtakpan itong si Bangagers. Ito po mga kareaksyon, ayon kay Ombudsman si Crispin Remula, ito ay may kaugnayan ng umano'y money laundering. Bakit money laundering? Bakit money laundering? Bakit money laundering? Bakit money laundering? Nasaan yung mga maleta? Bakit money laundering? Babanatan po nila si Tambaloslos ng katarantaduan na naman. Ano na to? Chapter 5 na ba to ng kanila sarswela? Money laundering? Bakit money laundering? Bakit hindi plunder? Bakit money laundering? Ang tanong ko sa iyo, Bonjeng, bakit money laundering? Bakit hindi plunder? Bakit hindi graft and corruption? Bakit hindi yung flood control? Yung dalawang magpinsan na yan, sila yung magnanakaw sa kawan ng bayan. Bakit money laundering? Bakit hindi plunder? Bakit hindi plunder? Bakit money laundering? Yun ang tanong ko. Di ba? Magaling silang gumawa ng kasarswela, money laundering. Babanatan ka namin ng money laundering, ha? Nag-usap-usap. Babanatan ka namin ng money laundering. Bakit? Ano gusto mo? Money laundering o plunder? Money laundering na lang, money laundering na lang. Okay. Umpisa na natin. Pero ma-absolto ako. Ma-absolto ka. Magyari lang yan. Basta't huwag kang lalabas na basa. Walang Singapore. Babanatan ka namin ng money laundering, di ba? Tarantaduan nila, ano yan? Laglagan na ba o talagang kasama yan sa show? Balikan po natin yung malabong-malabo po ang impeachment laban kay BP Sara Duterte. Ako po, eto na, sumagot na si BP Sara. Money laundering!
Namo. Ganon, am I that stupid? English yan. Tagalog niyan is ganon ako gagago. Abogado ako, fiscal ako, ganon ako gagago.
Tama kayo, Mr. Chair. Tama po si Mr. Duterte.
Money laundering! Ako, mga kareaksyon, ano na naman alam nila money laundering na yan? Ako po! Di ba ito?
The Office of the Vice President is now addressing the
Addressing na! Ano naman money laundering na yan? Di ba? Addressing na! Hintayin po ninyo. Addressing na, addressing!
notice of disallowance from the Commission on Audit. May live report si Isaiah Mirafuentes mula sa Batasang Pambansa. Isaiah, paki-explain ano itong notice of disallowance at yung implikasyon nito sa kaso ng Vice Presidente.
May bago yun, naglabas na nga ng pahayag ang Office of the Vice President kaugnay nga sa naungkat kahapon na 375 million pesos notice of disallowance ng Commission on Audit laban sa OVP. Dahil nga dito may umabot na sa 448 million pesos ang halagang dapat ibalik ng opisina ng Vice. Aminado ang Office of the Vice President na natanggap na nila ang notice of disallowance sa kanilang paggastos ng confidential funds para sa taong 2023 at nangako naman ng OVP na kanila na itong inaasikaso base sa COA rules. Subalit ayon rin sa tanggapan, hindi pa raw nila natatanggap ang notice of disallowance para sa taong 2022 o yung 73.3 million pesos disallowance mula sa COA. At ito ang natukoy ng Commission on Audit sa nakaraang pagdinig ng House Justice Committee kaugnay sa impeachment complaints laban kay VP Sara. Samantala, may naniniwala naman ang Makabayan Block sa Kamara na ito ay malinaw raw na pang-aabuso sa tiwala ng publiko at hindi raw normal ang halos 500 million pesos na disallowance. Nananawagan rin sila na dapat alisin ang confidential and intelligence funds sa mga sibilyan na opisyal ng gobyerno o yung mga opisyal na hindi sundalo o kaya pulis dahil naniniwala ang grupong Makabayan na malapit ito sa abuso. Humihiling din sila sa Kamara na magsagawa ng reforma para matigil na ang pang-aabuso sa confidential and intelligence funds. Samantala, may ayon naman sa
Mga makabayan, takot na takot po sa confidential pa niyan. Kasi pag inoperate po sila ni BP Sara, talagang ligwak ang mga yan. Ligwak. Ligwak. Di ba mga kareaksyon? Kapag inoperate yan ni BP Sara, ligwak yan. Tuloy!
Kaya ni Sagi Party List Representative Paulo Marcoleta, sinabi niya na ang nagpapatuloy raw na impeachment proceedings dito sa Kamara ay tila pagsasayang lang raw ng oras ng mga mambabatas. Yan raw ay sa kabila ng may kasalukuyang krisis tayong nararanasan sa ngayon. Ayon rin sa kanya, may posible raw na ang ginagawa ng House of Representatives ay demolition job lang laban kay Vice President Sara Duterte. May.
Isaiah, may mga nagtatanong kung ito bang notice of disallowance ay isang impeachable offense.
May sa katunayan ng notice of disallowance mula sa Commission on Audit ay hindi act o literal na impeachable offense dahil ito lang ay inilabas ng COA dahil nga sa may hindi malinaw na naipaliwanag ang Office of the Vice President kaugnay nga sa paggastos nila ng confidential funds. Sabihin may pagkakataon ng Office of the Vice President na maitama itong disallowance na inilabas ng COA. Subalit may
Lako mga kareaksyon, ano kaya ginagawa ng mga tratado ngayon? Ano kaya naman bago nilang plano? Ano po ang bago nilang plano sa nangyari pong yung sinasabi po nilang notice of disallowance, hindi pala impeachable offense. Kaya kailangan lang magano mga kareaksyon, kailangan lang paliwanag. Go. BP Sara, ikaw na bahala dyan.
It's a numbers game.
Malabo. Malabo pa po sa sikat ng
For the Senate to convict
mga kareaksyon, hintayin po ninyo. Re-reactionan natin yung nangyayari sa Supreme Court ngayon. Yung nangyayari sa Supreme Court, ginigisa po ang wet packs ni Bangag. Ginigisa po ang wet packs ni Bangag, mga kareaksyon. Hintayin ninyo.
Anak ka ng
Bangag!
anak ka ng
Bangag!
anak ka ng pulis.
Bangag!
the Vice President. It's a numbers game. For the Senate to convict the Vice President, they need 2/3 vote. So, meron ba silang 16 senators to convict the Vice President? If they don't have 16 senators, kahit absent pa si Senator De La Rosa, they need 16 positive votes. So, if we count the sitting senators and analyze the situation, malaking pag-asa na si VP Sara ay hindi mako-convict sa impeachment.
Nasa linya po ng ating komunikasyon ngayong umaga si Attorney J.D. Hinlo. Attorney, good morning. May aga po. Jade at Admar ang inyong muling makakasama. Maraming salamat po sa inyong oras.
Mayong aga, Jade and Admar, at sa lahat ng tagapakinig ng SMNI.
Opo. Attorney, pag-uusapan po natin itong inilabas nga na notice of disallowance ng Commission on Audit laban sa opisina ng Vice Presidente at sa katunayan, meron nga silang inutos na isa uli itong nasa 375 million pesos na halaga ng confidential funds ng Vice Presidente. Unang-una, ano ho ba itong notice of disallowance?
Ibig sabihin po, it's a finding by the COA, Commission on Audit, na sinasabi na hindi sinunod ng isang opisina ang paraan ng pag-disburse ng pondo o hindi niya ma-justify na within the parameters kung saan authorized na gastusin yung pondo. So it could be substantive, it can be procedural.
Po.
So when you say procedural, for example, dapat hindi pwede na na ordinary receipt lang, kailangan official receipt. So there are rules set by the COA, although it's confidential funds, that should be strictly followed by the office para hindi magka-problema.
Opo. Para lang sa kaalaman ng ating mga kababayan, yung mga ilan nga sa mga naging batayan kung bakit nila pinapasauli nga itong 375 million pesos na halaga ng Confi funds ay yung unauthorized daw na pag-handle, no? Paghawak ng pondo, yung hindi napatunayang confidential operations, mga questionable procurement, ipinagbabawal na reimbursement. Ito ho ba ay pinal na, attorney?
Any order by the COA, once it reaches the end of the appeal process, is considered final and executory. Pero merong judicial remedy dyan if it is alleged that it was exercised with grave abuse of discretion. So doon na pwedeng lumapit sa korte at yung pinal na makakapagsabi kung tama o mali yung desisyon ng COA ay ang Korte Suprema. If the appeal process is exhausted. So I presume that the OVP has no choice but to exhaust the appeal process under the court system up to the Supreme Court. At matagal pa ito.
At kapag may notice of disallowance sa attorney, automatic bang may pananagutan na po yung isang opisyal?
When you say final and executory, up to the level of the COA na appeal, may karapatan sila na i-collect yan. So, but they need to enforce it through another court proceeding. Hindi pwede na sasabihin ng COA na yung bank account mo, Vice President, kunin namin yan. No, they cannot do that. The COA has to course through their action sa korte para makolek yung sinisingil nilang amount sa kay Vice President.
Opo. Dito ko sa naging findings nga ng COA, attorney, na questionable nga yung procurement, may mga reimbursement na prohibited. Posible bang technical lapse lang ito?
I have no access to the actual documents. Ito kasi we must look at it in its totality, no? Hindi lang ito simpleng audit. We know for a fact na may political contest between the president and the vice president. And although the COA is a separate office at supposedly independent constitutional body, tayo naman, alam natin na yung nakaupo dyan ay appointed by the President. Now, there's the benefit of the doubt that the people in the Commission on Audit are doing their job correctly. But there is also a way for the respondent to make sure na yung ginawa ng COA-ng desisyon ay naaayon sa batas, even no na merong sariling COA rules, dapat ito'y susunod sa konstitusyon. So doon nga yung final na decision ay ang Korte Suprema. But unless there is an injunction or immediate restraining order, nothing can stop the COA from initiating an action in the courts for a collection case. At yan ay matagal pang proseso kasi yun nga, the COA has no authority to immediately just get the funds of the VP. Now, yung mga korte, pag alam nila na may pending certiorari sa Korte Suprema, they could go ahead slowly by saying that they will respect pendency of a case. So, hindi nila kaagad actionan yan. Discretion rin yan ng sitting judge. Especially if the case is this high profile. Kaya nga, tayo, makakabigay lang tayo ng speculation, bigay lang tayo ng presumption, but we have no access to the actual documents. Now, yung sinasabi for example nga, dapat may official receipt kasi yan yung rule ng COA. Pwede naman sabihin ng Korte Suprema, yung confidential agent ba mag-i-issue ng official receipt? Katangahan yun. Dahil yung confidential agent, sila yung nagtuturo kung sino yung mga criminal, sino yung terorista. So, syempre, papel lang yan, disbursement fund paper lang yan. Hindi yan official receipt. Yung iba naman, for example, yung issue na bakit ibinigay yung pondo sa hindi authorized na opisyal. Yung sagot naman dyan, yung authorized na opisyal, siya yung nakatanggap ng pondo. Siyempre, ipapasa niya sa ibang tao na siya yung pwedeng magbigay sa confidential agent. Kasi, just imagine, the cashier of an agency will be the one to disburse it to confidential agents. Hindi na magiging confidential. So, there are things that needs to be...
So, naririnig niyo yun, mga Congress crocodile niya sa Kongreso. Naririnig niyo lahat yan. O, umanap uli kayo ng mga iba pang mga katarantaduan para ma-impeach si Sara Duterte. Hindi na umubra tong anong tawag dito? Yung disallowance na yan, kagaguhan na sinasabi yung impeachable. Hindi naman pala impeachable.
Reviewed that needs to be decided by the Supreme Court based on circumstance. Kaya nga confidential agent kasi ayaw ipaalam yung itsura, yung pangalan dahil very sensitive yung ginagawang trabaho. Now, that is my observation sa sitwasyon. But as a rule, yung akin naman, based on government reform, sana, yung mga confidential at intelligence funds, it should be limited to our police force, our military, our intelligence officers. Hindi yan dapat binibigay sa mga mayor, sa mga office of the president or vice president. Pag binigay yan sa office of the president or vice president, it must be limited in scope. Hindi yung billions. Paano yun ma-disperse? You mean to say yung billions, lahat yan binibigay mo sa mga confidential agents? Kasi there is a possibility in the real world na yung confidential funds, hindi naman yan ninanakaw, pero ginagastos sa pagtulong o sa sinasabi nating ayuda, which is still not proper because if we follow strictly the idea of a confidential fund, purely intelligence matter yan. Hindi yung pangtulong sa libingan, hindi pang tulong sa ospital. So, meron tayong i-advise sa Kongreso at sa Office of the President, better review the rules on confidential funds and dapat paliitin ito para hindi siya whether with good or bad intention, confidential funds, and dapat paliitin ito para hindi siya whether with good or bad intention, ma-avoid yung sitwasyon na magamit ito na hindi sang-ayon sa rules ng COA.
Opo. At kapag pinabalik po yung pera, halimbawa na nga dito sa kaso ng opisina ng Vice Presidente, ibig hubang sabihin ito, yung kasunod na kaso is administratibo na at criminal case?
Yung paniwala ko, if it is proven that the spending is in good faith, na nagkamali lang sa, let's say, reporting, yung sinasabi lang ibalik, at kung ibabalik ito, there's no more criminal liability because hindi naman yan nakaw eh. Yung sinasabi lang dyan, it depends on the findings na hindi sinunod yung reporting let's say requirement ng COA. So it does not mean na binulsa. It's a different thing kung yung decision is sinabi ng COA nga it is proven na yung pera ay binulsa at ginamit hindi sang-ayon sa batas. Pero kung yung sinabi ng na technical ka kasi dapat yung resibo ganito o dapat yung manner of reporting ganyan, kaya they cannot say na proper yung disbursement, it's in good faith. You may be administratively liable but not necessarily criminally liable. So at the same time, while the impeachable officer is sitting, hindi siya mafafailan ng administrative or criminal case kasi dadaan muna ng impeachment.
Opo. At sa alin ho ba yung mauna o pareho bang mananagot si VP Sara at yung kanyang mga implementing officers like yung disbursing officer at yung accountant attorney?
Ito yung ito yung legal at political na sagot, no. Yung sa legal, nothing can stop let's say the ombudsman from running after certain public officials using a final and executive decision of the COA, except sa vice president kasi impeachable officer, they have to impeach her first. But yung mga ibang official, the office of the ombudsman can actually proceed with either criminal or administrative action. Now, this could also be affected with whatever decision na magkakaroon ng Korte Suprema kasi may tinatawag rin tayong prejudicial question. So kung ako naman sa depensa, yung isasagot ko naman kung may complaint, sasabihin ko, oops, medyo mag-hold kayo. I move for the suspension of the proceeding because there's a pending prejudicial question as to the legality of the COA finding. So, which will directly affect the expected decision of the Office of the Ombudsman or the criminal courts. So, dahil dyan, there's a big possibility na isususpend yung proceeding at aantayin yung proceeding na matapos sa Korte Suprema. Kasi, imagine a situation na let's say yung ombudsman magsasabi, kasi may karapatan yung ombudsman on the administrative cases. Sasabihin niya na may final decision is guilty sa administrative aspect. Example lang yun And a year or two later, sasabihin ng Korte Suprema, innocent. Paano yan? Apektado na yung empleyado at opisyal, kinonvict mo na administratively, then tinanggal mo na sa trabaho and pinahiya mo na, and all of a sudden sasabihin ng Korte Suprema sa kaso related to the Commission on Audit finding na inosente. So that's why it will also guide the ombudsman at the same time yung mga korte to suspend once the respondent appeals the concept of prejudicial question.
Opo. Attorney, linawin ko lamang, ang issue po dito ay yung usapin o issue ng kakulangan ng papeles at hindi po indikasyon ng maling paggamit ng pondo. Tama ho ba?
we don't have access to the exact findings, no, final findings of the COA. Kasi nga even yung nababasa ko, even the Vice President does not have a copy yet. Nauna pa yung yung House Justice Committee na nagkaroon ng kopya. So, to be fair to the Vice President, antayin natin na mapag-aralan nila yung findings ng COA. Kasi I suppose hindi pa siya naka-file ng motion for reconsideration unless the pending decision na inilabas is based on a pending motion for reconsideration. But based on our readings, it is based on appeal, and there is a chance pa na maka-file siya sa motion for reconsideration on the issue at hand.
Opo. Bago ko ipasa kay attorney, so ito pong isyong ito dyan sa COA ng opisina po ng Vice Presidente ay magiging credible na ebidensya bang tawag doon sa ginagawang impeachment hearing ngayon dyan sa Kamara?
Iba yung appreciation ng COA, iba rin yung magiging appreciation ng House, iba rin yung magiging appreciation ng Senado. The senators sitting as trial judges, even if the COA will say na, let's say, nagkamali si Vice President, pag yung konsensya ng senador magsasabi no to conviction, anong magagawa ng COA? Anong magagawa ng korte? Wala silang magagawa because the impeachment court is a separate court na may jurisdiction over the issue of impeachment. So, the senator judges, if they use their conscience, they will be presumed to independently vote correctly. Kasi yan yung paniwala nila eh. Just like the Supreme Court, the justices can vote differently. May majority and may minority ruling. So, it's a numbers game. For the Senate to convict the Vice President, they need 2/3 vote. So, meron ba silang 16 senators to convict the Vice President? If they don't have 16 senators, kahit absent pa si Senator De La Rosa, they need 16 positive votes. So, if we count the sitting senators and analyze the situation, malaking pag-asa na si VP Sara ay hindi mako-convict sa impeachment.
Attorney, mayong aga, si Admar po ito.
Mayong aga, Admar.
Itong nakalipas, naglabas po ng desisyon ng Korte Suprema na mali nga yung naunang impeachment process nila at dapat dumaan talaga sa due process. After po noon, inimbitahan ng House Committee on Justice dito nga sa gumugulong na impeachment hearing dyan sa Kamara ang pangalawang Pangulo. Ngunit hindi kinwestiyon ito ng pangalawang Pangulo at sabing hindi makikiisa sa impeachment hearing or proceedings dyan po sa Kamara. Nakikita nyo po ba, sa tingin nyo, parte pa rin ang sinasabi ng Korte Suprema na due process, ito pong ginagawa ng Kamara sa kabila ng pagsasabi ng inaakusahan na hindi siya makikilahok, kine-question na niya ito. Hindi po ba pag sa piskal, pag hindi lumahok yung isa, maaari nang pwede nang idiretso doon mismo sa korte. Ditong nakalipas, marami silang mga ipinatawag, maraming nagbigay ng testimonya at sa susunod ata na pagdinig, yung ombudsman, si dating Senador Trillanes, ipapatawag at meron pagpahayag na by Mayo daw, doon pa magkakaroon ng botohan kung kanila bang i-impeach ang pangalawang Pangulo. Attorney JV.
Well, yung full disclosure muna, isa ako sa petitioner na nag-challenge sa proceeding sa House of Justice Committee. kasama ako ni Attorney Torion, Attorney Jimmy Bondok, Attorney Vic Rodriguez. Now, yung position namin is that yung sinasabing due process na requirement ng Korte Suprema ay nagawa na nung tinanong si VP Sara kung ano yung answer niya. She submitted an answer. That's already compliance of the due process. As compared sa previous, na sa first impeachment, na pinaakit lang yung kaso sa kanila na hindi siya pinasagot at in-endorse na sa Senado. Di sabi ng Korte Suprema, may mali kayo. Bago nyo dapat endorse sa Senado, sana pinasagot nyo muna yung tao para makapagbigay ng side niya. Dati, they just voted more than one-third votes, then submitted it to the Senate. So yan yung violation dati. Isa sa violation dati. Aside from the issue of the 1-year ban ng complaints, no? So, sa desisyon ng Korte Suprema, lipat na tayo sa second impeachment. Di ginawa na ng House. Yung sa House Justice, pinasagot si VP o sinagot ni VP. Kung hindi sila satisfied sa sagot ni VP, tapos na yung issue kasi they are bound within the complaint and the evidence attached to the complaint. They should now vote based on that kasi pinasagot na nila yung tao at yung sagot ng tao, whether she will cooperate or not, karapatan yun kasi may right rin siya against self-incrimination. The decision to submit it to the Senate should only be based on the complaint answer and to stop already from fishing for evidence. Parang may isang congressman umamin na this is not about conviction raw, this is about evidence gathering. So precisely yan yung punto namin kasi yung complaint is limited to the evidence of the complainants. At yung House are there not as a complainant but as judges to find out if there's enough evidence based on the complaint and it is in compliance with the form and substance para maitaas sa Senado. So, what they're doing now, based sa aming assessment, is already more than the powers granted to them by the Constitution. Even if, based on their own rules, sinasabi nila justified. But that House rules must be in compliance with the Constitution.
Opo. Dito po sa mga panibagong sasabihin pa no ng kanilang mga resource person na hindi rin pwede na hindi rin pwedeng pagtatanungin, walang cross-examination din na ginagawa, parang confirmation lang doon sa kanilang mga testimonya. Saklaw na rin ba ito doon po sa inyo pong petisyon na inihain sa Korte Suprema or maaring dagdag pa ito na question? Itong patuloy pa rin hanggang bukas ata, no, magkakaroon muli ng pagdinig. Dagdag pa rin ito na pwedeng isumbong ulit sa Korte Suprema kasi hindi na due process, lahat na sa side po ng mga nag-aakusa po laban sa pangalawang Pangulo.
I think yung issue of subpoena was specifically included in the case filed by certain intervenors, no? Merong sumunod sa amin na nag-file ng mga intervenors touching on the issue of subpoena. And narinig ko rin sa balita and read it na even Attorney Mans Carpio, yung husband ni VP Sara, also as a local court to issue an injunction. Now, lahat ng ito without a restraining order or an injunction from any of the courts in which nag-handle ng kaso, patuloy yung proceeding. But
Opo.
it does not mean na kahit na makapasok, sasabihin lang na moot and academic, because if it's already within the court process, what if the court would later on decide at sasabihin, let's say they already violated the Constitution. So again, there is a possibility that the court will strike down the entire proceeding.
Opo, attorney, dito naman po tayo sa issue po.
Jade and Admar,
Yes po.
by the way, I'm about to board the
Okay.
boat going outside Bacolod. So,
Sige po.
I think we have to cut our interview.
Opo. Maraming salamat.
So let's begin. I have an acronym for unprogrammed appropriations. IHUWAS. For me, they stand for I hate unprogrammed appropriations. And I've already said so in my separate concurring and dissenting opinion in the Pimentel case. There. Where, among others, I bluntly said and wrote, among others, that unprogrammed appropriations in any form are unconstitutional. My opinion, Madam Solgen, is, in my reckoning, it stands on very solid constitutional grounds, and I'll show you why. The constitutional framework for the national budget is, of course, spread over several constitutional provisions. But hearing from our amicis, specifically former Budget Secretary Abad, it is an accountability framework. And taking that cue from Secretary Abad, it is a rigid budget with purpose-specific spending. Why? Article 7, Section 22 requires the President to submit to Congress within that period of 30 days a budget of expenditures and sources of financing. That is the BESF. And for me, and my clear, or which is based on my very clear understanding of the constitutional provisions, the BESF can only refer to program appropriations and automatic appropriations. They can never include unprogrammed appropriations. And hearing from you earlier, they can only be found in the National Expenditure Program, which is the so-called President's budget. But the Constitution does not refer to a NEP. It refers to a BESF. Now, Article 6, Section 25, subparagraph 2, complements Article 7, Section 22. It says, no provision or enactment shall be embraced in the General Appropriations Bill unless it relates specifically to some particular provision therein. Any such provision or enactment shall be limited in its operation to the appropriation to which it relates. And that is my basis for saying that the constitutional framework, insofar as our budget is concerned, is one that is rigid and with purpose specific spending architecture. So, you are articulating for the government an interpretation of these constitutional provisions, one that is flexible. Isn't it, Madam Soljan? I have a problem
To a
with the
certain
word
extent,
flexibility or fiscal flexibility, as you said. Flexibility comes from the word flexible or flex. No? And another word for flex is bend. Are you advocating bending the Constitution?
Definitely not, Your Honor.
Why is that, Madam Soljan? Because with your argument for flexibility in that you are advancing and program appropriations to be within the framework of the government, even though it is not in the BESF, it is still to be considered as fiscal flexibility.
Your Honor, it is
Don't you think this budget problem is so hard to understand?
it is, Your Honor. So we've had so many briefings. We have a deeper appreciation of the complexity of the processes.
So it's not a household budget, right?
No, but parallel.
Okay, so that there are so many things I need to clarify so that we can understand this together. I'll go through some basic questions, all right?
Okay, thank you.
So I'll begin with Section 29(1) of Article 6 of the Constitution, and it says, "No money shall be paid out of the Treasury except in pursuance of an appropriation made by law." In other words, only Congress can authorize the expenditure of public funds, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
And this is otherwise referred to as the power of the purse.
Correct, Your Honor.
Do you recall the case of Araujo versus Aquino III?
Yes, Your Honor.
In this case, the court extensively discussed the budget process, and in the budget process, namely budget preparation, budget legislation, budget execution, and accountability, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
So that everybody is on the same page, I'm showing a slide on the pertinent portions of Araujo versus Aquino. And it says there, the Philippine budget cycle, 4 phases. They comprise budget preparation, budget legislation, budget execution, and accountability. The budget legislation phase covers the period commencing from the time Congress receives the President's budget, which is inclusive of the NEP and the BASF. So when we say that Congress has the power of the purse, do you agree with me that this refers to the budget legislation or budget authorization phase mentioned in Araujo?
Yes, Your Honor.
So this means that when Congress comes up with the General Appropriations Bill, which eventually becomes the General Appropriations Act or the GAA, the amounts appropriated for every program, activity, and project or PAP were primarily based on the proposed budget, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
And this proposed budget, it comes from the President,
Yes, Your Honor.
and that is why it is called the President's budget, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
And once the budget is submitted to Congress, Congress reviews the same, subject to certain limits set by the Constitution, on the exercise of the power of the purse, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
And one of those limits is found in Article 6, Section 25. Can I see the slide? Which says, Congress may not increase the appropriations recommended by the President for the operation of the government as specified in the budget. The form, content, and manner of preparation of the budget shall be prescribed by law. I've highlighted the portion that says the form, content, and manner of preparation shall be prescribed by law. The law here refers to the Administrative Code of 1987, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
specifically Book 6, Chapter 3, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. I'm bringing up Section 11, the relevant portions of the Admin Code, Book 6, Chapter 3. It provides for the submission by the President of the proposed budget. This is the form, content, and manner referred to in the constitutional provision, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
So it mentions national government budget, estimated receipts, budget proposal, programs, projects, and activities, budget message, summary of financial statements, and what A and 12(2)B, requiring the estimated expenditures and estimated receipts for the ensuing fiscal year. That refers to the BESF, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Section 12(2)A also states, and I quote, the proposed appropriations necessary for the support of the government for the ensuing fiscal year. This refers to the PAPs expressed or appearing in the NEP, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, if we are to go back to the Constitution, these are actually echoed in relevant portions or provisions on the submission of the budget. For example, Article 7, Section 22. It requires the President to submit, and I quote, a budget of expenditures and sources of financing, close quote, within 30 days. Correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
Meanwhile, Article 6, Section 25, which prohibits Congress from increasing the proposed budget, explicitly refers to, again I quote, the appropriations recommended by the President for the operation of the government. Correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
Okay. And when the Constitution says appropriations recommended by the President, that is in the NEP. Correct?
Okay, Your Honor, I'm trying to recall. So the NEP, the NEP includes both the programmed appropriations and the unprogrammed appropriations.
Correct.
So it is our humble submission,
Yes, but
Your Honor.
those are the appropriations recommended by the President because the NEP originates from the office of the President.
Yes, yes, correct.
Yes, I'm
That's
going to go
correct.
to where you're going. Don't worry. So now that we're on the same page, let's look together at the budget documents submitted by the President for fiscal year 2024, 2025, and 2026. Can you bring up Section 1 of the general provisions in the 2024 NEP? It is there stated that, and I quote, the amount of 4.3 million is hereby appropriated out of any funds of the National Treasury not otherwise appropriated for the operation of the government. That's Section 1. This amount of 4.3 trillion refers to the new general appropriations for fiscal year 2024, which is the sum of 4.019 billion for programmed and 281.9 billion for unprogrammed, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
All right. That's in the slide. You can see that the slide which appears in the submission shows both programmed and unprogrammed.
Correct, Your Honor.
Let's go to the 2025 NEP. And it states, and I quote, the proposed total new general appropriations requiring legislative authorization will amount to 4,405 billion, composed of 4,247 billion in programmed appropriations and 158.67 billion in unprogrammed appropriations, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
Again, that is reflected in that table being flashed on the screen. Finally, in the introduction to the 2026 NEP, it also states, if I can have it flashed, the total proposed level for new general appropriations, which requires legislative authorization, comprised of programmed and unprogrammed appropriations, amounts to 4.652.8 billion. Correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
All right. So based on the foregoing, it appears to me, at least, no? It appears clear to me when the President requests legislative authority, he is requesting spending authority in the amounts for both programmed and unprogrammed. Do we agree?
I agree, Your Honor.
And when Congress acts on the proposed budget submitted by the President, it in fact evaluates both programmed and unprogrammed appropriations, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
Because unprogrammed appropriations, by its nature, constitutes, in your words, a standby authority.
Correct, Your Honor.
In fact, in your statements in the last oral arguments, you describe the PAPs in the unprogrammed appropriations as, and I quote you, the government's aspirational priorities, programs which are also needed and ready for implementation, but whose funding depends on specific fiscal events that may or may not occur. Correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
All right. So when Congress authorizes the amounts allocated for unprogrammed appropriations, the result is the same. The executive can implement the PAPs and for that purpose spend public funds, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
I'm showing to you Section 23, Chapter 4, Book 6 of the Admin Code. It also says that the GAA must show the appropriations for each PAP, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
So to be clear, the BESF provides for the expenses and sources of funding, but it is the NEP that indicates the PAPs that should be funded for the next fiscal year. Agree?
I agree, Your Honor.
So the NEP is essentially the expression of the President's priority programs and policies, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
Therefore, given all of these, to my mind, at least to my mind, there is no other conclusion other than the fact that when the Constitution prohibits Congress from increasing the appropriations recommended by the President, that prohibition includes all the appropriations in the NEP. Do you agree?
We respectfully disagree, Your Honor.
I'm going to go to that one. You're talking about the deficit, the budget deficit?
We went, Your Honor, in order to interpret the constitutional provision, we look at the deliberations and also the history of the constitutional provision on what is being referred to in the President's proposed appropriations for the operations of government. And it is our submission that it refers to the BESF, which includes the programmed appropriations.
There are no programmed appropriations in the BSF. They're just sources of funding. It's really the NEP.
The BESF and the TEP both contain the programmed appropriations and the automatic appropriations. So they are they detail the expenses and the sources of financing. So that's why it's called the BESF.
Okay, we will agree to disagree. I'm showing you a table comparing the appropriations in the 2024, 2025, and 2026 NEP and GAA. Looking at this, can you confirm, Counsel, that Congress retained the total programmed appropriations recommended by the President in 2024 and 2026, but reduced the programmed appropriations in 2025?
I don't have the details, but based on this one, Your Honor, I will agree.
Okay. So looking at the same table, in 2024, Congress increased the total unprogrammed appropriations almost threefold, or by 449.5 billion. And in 2025, the increase was 204.75 billion. And based on this same table, this resulted in Congress increasing the total appropriations recommended by the President in 2024 and 2025. Can we agree on that?
Correct, Your Honor.
Can you put on the screen again Article 6, Section 25(1)? May not increase the appropriations recommended by the President. this prohibition, at least textually, Madam Solicitor General, this is clear. Textually.
Your Honor, it is our humble position that this provision has to be interpreted with Article 6, Section 25, Paragraph 1. The provision that says as to what the President has to propose to the Congress, which is the proposed appropriations based on the operations, for the operations of government.
That's the NEP.
That is the BESF.
And the NEP.
The NEP,
The BSF doesn't have the appropriations, right?
Your Honor, the NEP consists of the programmed and the unprogrammed appropriation. It is our position that we are referring to the BESF, which does not contain the unprogrammed appropriation.
No,
because
the BSF contains expenses and sources of financing.
that is correct.
Based on the
Your Honor.
expenses and the sources of financing, the President, through the executive, through the President, now says, I want to use that money to fund these particular projects.
Yes, Your Honor.
And you find that in the NEP.
Yes, Your Honor, but the unprogrammed appropriations are
I'm not talking about
found.
unprogrammed. I'm talking only about the NEP being the expression of where I will use the money to fund which PAPs.
Yes, Your Honor.
Correct?
Correct,
So when
Your
you
Honor.
talk about budget, you just don't talk about sources of funding.
Yes,
You talk about saan mo ilalaan yung pera.
yes, Your Honor, the expenditures.
And that's the NEP.
Yes, the NEP includes both, but when I
No, the budget
mentioned
includes BSF and the NEP.
the budget for us, Your Honor,
No, that's why I started everything, Solicitor General, by posting to you all the provisions of the Constitution that referred to budget.
yes. May I clarify, Your Honor? And when I mentioned a while ago that we looked at the deliberations of the CONCOM for the Constitution, it is our interpretation that the rationale for the requirement of sealing is so that there will be no unbounded expenditures that will result in too much deficit. And
Yes.
that's why when the President proposes for expenditures and the sources of financing, it is our considered position and the interpretation also of Congress for so many years since 1987 Constitution, and that I think was the point of the amicus curiae, that it has been interpreted by Congress, which is also a reasonable interpretation. There is no prohibition as to unprogrammed appropriations. The unprogrammed appropriations are sourced from different sources of financing, and which former Congressman Joey Salceda mentioned that it is self-funding. And that's why, to us, to the respondents, generally speaking, the unprogrammed appropriations will not result in a deficit because they are sourced from different sources of funding.
Understood. I think the words of Congressman Salceda is that unprogrammed funds are deficit neutral, correct?
Deficit neutral, correct.
And I'll go there later. In the meantime, you were asked by Justice Leonen whether there is anything in the Constitution that says any excess revenue should be first applied to PAPs in the programmed appropriations and not to the unprogrammed appropriations. I think that's a transcript of the oral arguments. And your response is, it is only in the GAA, Your Honor. I'd like to clarify, what do you mean by that? It is only in the GAA?
I was referring to the condition or the triggers which are specified in the special provision of the GAA.
Okay. So, to be clear, your position is that the constitutional prohibition on increasing the president's proposed budget exists primarily to prevent a budget deficit. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
Your Honor, that was the rationale that we interpreted from the exchange of Commissioner Davide and Mr. Natividad.
Okay, so that everybody again is on the same page, can you pull up the language for the triggers in 2024, 2025, and 2026? In all of these GAAs, Section 1, it says any of the following exists: excess revenue collections in any one of the identified non-tax revenues from its corresponding revenue collection target. Same with 2025 and 2026. This is what you are referring to as the basis of your interpretation of what the Constitution prohibits, correct?
This is statutory,
Yes.
Your Honor.
Yes. So this is your basis.
Yes, Your Honor. Although, may I clarify, and my team can also help me confirm, because my recollection is in the 2024 GAA, the wording is accurate, but in the 2025 and 2026, okay, tama po pala. I'm sorry, Your Honor.
That's okay. So under the first condition, excess collections in any one of the identified non-tax revenue sources can trigger the authority to spend the unprogrammed appropriations, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
And new revenue collections from sources not reflected in the BSF can also trigger the unprogrammed appropriations under the second condition, correct?
Your Honor, may I qualify? The sources that are referred to in the special provision are also anchored on the targets that are enumerated in the BESF because they are excess in the target revenue collection.
I have an example that will show that, if you don't mind. Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor.
But you agree that as soon as either condition arises, the spending authority for the unprogrammed appropriations is triggered.
It is triggered, Your Honor, depending on the requirements of the certification from the Bureau of Treasury and the DBM issuance of the SARO.
Yes, okay. So at that point in time, when these triggers are triggered, the agencies with PAPs in the unprogrammed appropriations may apply for its release. Correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
And they can apply for their release even if the revenue target for the year for programmed appropriations have not been met. Correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
Okay, let's have a more concrete example. Based on the 2026 BSF, the projected revenue from the non-tax revenue programs of the following agencies are the following. So you have 3.8 for DOTR, 961 million for DOF, and another 815 for registration fees of the DOTR. These projected revenues fund the PAPs in the programmed appropriations, correct?
I will trust Your Honor.
It's in the BSF.
Yes, but I don't have the detail, but I trust Your Honor, your slide.
Okay. So let's say that as of the end of the third quarter of 2026, DOTR, DOF, and DOT are able to collect the following amounts. Can you look at the next slide? DOTR is able to collect 2 billion, DOF, BOC is able to collect 2 billion, DOT is able to collect 500 million. That's a total collected amount of 4.5 billion. Agree?
Yes, Your Honor.
Considering that 4.5 billion is less than the 5.6 billion projected revenue for quarter 3, you do not have a surplus at the end of the third quarter, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
Okay, let's expand the example. Let's also say that there is a programmed appropriation for a PAP worth 5 billion and an unprogrammed appropriation for another PAP worth 1 billion under unprogrammed. Question: do we have enough to fund the PAP under the programmed appropriation worth 5 billion? We
Your
don't.
Honor, if it is in the
Program.
BESF, if it is in the program, then there is a corresponding source of financing.
No, I'm giving you the example already. That's how much money they made as of the third quarter. And the total is only 4.5 billion. But the
Okay.
projected revenues or for the third quarter is 5.6 billion.
I submit, Your Honor.
Okay. So, assuming that there is a PAP under the programmed appropriation worth 5 billion, and there is a PAP under the unprogrammed part worth 1 billion, my question first is, do you have enough to fund the PAP under the program?
No, Your Honor.
You're missing 500 million,
Yes, Your Honor.
which the government can perhaps earn in the last quarter. Quarter 4.
Could be, Your Honor.
Could be. Now, going back to my earlier slide, which shows, again, this is only an example, that the Bureau of Customs has already exceeded its projected revenue from import processing fees by about 1 billion. This would mean also that Special Provision 1A of the unprogrammed appropriations is triggered, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
In other words, the 1 billion may now be used to fund the PAP in the unprogrammed appropriation worth 1 billion, correct?
Well, actually, Your Honor, our interpretation or our submission is that if it is an excess of what has been accepted by Congress as the target, then it is a source of funding for the unprogrammed and not for the programmed.
Even if the BSF indicates that the earnings, that was a source of revenue for program.
Yes, Your Honor. That's what I was trying to explain a while ago with regard to the intuitive idea that the unprogrammed appropriations will only be funded if there is a surplus. But surplus, the DBM briefs us, has a technical meaning or even ordinary meaning, is that surplus is revenue minus disbursement. But it is not the source of funding. There should not be a surplus in order to fund an unprogrammed appropriation, but an excess in the...
I'm not understanding what you're saying, because what I showed you was the BSF. Those were the sources of funding for the programmed.
Yes,
And
yes,
one
Your
of those
Honor.
items, we get to collect much, much more.
Yes, Your Honor.
That now can be used for program.
Your Honor.
It's only a source of funding.
Yes, it's a source of funding, but attached to it is the target revenue which the government commits to meet.
Exactly.
And that is
And by the third quarter, it has exceeded that target.
Your Honor, may I mention that in the execution and administration of the fund, which is part of the budget execution, so the DBM is observing certain policies on cash programming in such a way. I think that this issue was also raised in Araulio, where at first the conclusion was, in order to determine if there is an excess that could be a source of unprogrammed appropriation, the DBM has to wait for the whole year.
No, hold on. I'm just talking about program. I have BSF telling me that licenses of the BOC is a source of funding for program. And in the third quarter, I realize I've far exceeded that amount. Common sense tells me
Yes.
that amount, which is a source of funding, which I identified in the BSF, can now be used for program activities.
I
Are we
agree.
saying that we cannot use it for program?
I agree, Your Honor. It is very intuitive. My interpretation, my submission is that the DBM works on a periodic checking if there is an excess. So there is also a periodic target that they have to meet.
Wait, I'm giving you quarter 3 figures. That's a quarterly figure of collections versus projections. And I've collected much, much more. What else will DBM look at?
Okay.
That's an excess in my projected revenues.
My understanding, Your Honor, is that every quarter they have to work.
That's why we're in the third quarter.
Yes, Your Honor. So you work on targets, and that's how the DBM will coordinate with the BTR if there is an excess in any one of the collection.
Can you bring up again the screen, the example? There. Projected revenues is 961. Isn't that the target?
Your Honor, if I may ask for the supporting explanation of the DBM, because that was also what we asked as to how they monitor the targets, because in the motion for reconsideration of Araulio, the Supreme Court also said that you don't have to wait for the whole year.
I disagree with your reading of Araulio. I'll flash it later on the screen. That is not how I read Araulio. But I do want to hear from DBM what explanation they have. Given my example, that's my target revenue. That's my projected revenue. I breached it. It's now 2 billion. Are you telling me that I cannot use the excess of 2 billion over 961 for programmed activities?
The actual revenues,
That's my example, huh?
okay. It depends. For me, Your Honor, it depends on what was the target revenue.
That's the target. That's the projected revenue. Yan ang tinitignan ng gobyerno to fund program.
Your Honor, may
Yes.
I ask for
Sure.
the DBM representative,
Because I'd like to
please?
understand.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. If I may take a step back and clarify one point on
Yeah.
the slide, it said there that there's 5 billion appropriation, but
In the
there's
program.
in the program, yes, sir.
Assume lang yan, ha?
Opo.
Ah,
And there's only 4.5
billion collected.
collected, but
Actual collections as
Yes.
of Q3.
for a specific program which
For
will
all three sources of funding.
Yes, Your
Okay.
Honor. So when we were proposing the budget, when we submit the BESF, the programmed appropriations have the necessary counterpart sources of financing in totality. So it's not really, except for special funds, which would have to be spent for a specific purpose, it would have considered that cash is fungible.
Hold on. But when you put it in the BSF as a source of funding, you're looking at it as a source of funding.
Yes, Your Honor.
To fund what? Program.
Yes, Your Honor.
Correct?
Yes, po.
And my example is very simple. I collect more than what I projected. Why can I not use that money for program?
When we are during the budget execution phase of the cycle, the DBM is implementing the General Appropriations Act. So at that point, considering that no money shall be paid out of the Treasury without an appropriation made by law, the only options left to the DBM for spending the excess revenue would be either to spend it for unprogrammed appropriations as provided by the GAA, or another option would be not to spend it for the unprogrammed appropriations.
No, but I go back to the question of Justice Marvick. Why not spend it for program? It's just money.
If we're referring to cash, Your Honor, the cash could be spent for program, but
So-
the excess revenue.
No, in my example is very specific. My collections is 2 billion. Your projected revenues was 900. So there's a increase of 1.1 billion. Can I use that for program?
The cash from the collections?
Yes.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. But can I use it also for unprogrammed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Also,
Yes.
correct? Because it is also triggered. It's excess revenue.
Yes, Your Honor.
Tama?
Yeah. May I clarify, Your Honor, that
Okay.
when you use it for the program, I qualified my answer that you can use the cash, considering the fungibility of the cash. But the notation or the ledger noting the excess revenue will still be available for appropriation towards the unprogrammed appropriation.
Wow, nawala ako dun.
Let me be clearer, Your Honor, if I may. So, when we have collections, of course, there's the cash. And there's also the trigger for the unprogrammed appropriations. The cash, our position has always been, it is fungible. So, if there is cash and it's like you have, if it's like depositing in a bank. You're not depositing in a safety deposit box, but you're depositing. So the cash itself is fungible, so you can spend it. But as to the trigger, whether you've already triggered the unprogrammed appropriation trigger to allow for releases, then yes, as soon as you have excess revenue beyond what is the target for the BES.
So I go back to my example. Is there an excess revenue beyond the target?
Yes.
So I can use it for unprogrammed.
Yes po.
But I can also use it for program if it were cash.
The cash po, yes.
The cash equivalent. Tama ba?
The cash is, yes, Your Honor.
Okay. So who chooses where to go? Who chooses that I use it for unprogrammed and not programmed?
At the point that there is a trigger and there's a corresponding request from the agencies which fall under the purposes identified under the unprogrammed appropriations, then there's no need to prioritize one or the other. Both can be released. But of course, the sources of financing.
No, it can be both. It's just 1 peso. Diba? 1 peso lang yung pwede mong ibigay, ilaan. Sinong pumipili kung saan mo ilalagay yon? Sa unprogrammed or programmed? Na-trigger ng unprogrammed. Pwede nang ilagay. So, kung pwede natin gamitin yon for unprogrammed, yes. The answer is yes.
Yes.
Kung pwede natin gamitin yon for program, the answer is also yes.
Yes.
Correct? So, sino nagde-decide? Yung pisong yon?
May I clarify,
Sige
Your
po.
Honor? When we propose the budget, there's an expenditure and a source of financing. And while we may not have all the cash for the sources of financing, and this is composed of both revenues and borrowings, these revenues and borrowings are already programmed and planned. So if we have committed to provide sources of financing for the programmed appropriations, that means that the national government is ready and willing to provide the corresponding source of financing.
Okay. So in other words, you got to trigger the unprogrammed and it gets spent for unprogrammed. Because at the end of the day, for programmed appropriations, government is ready to fulfill that.
Yes, Your Honor.
Kasi hindi nga safety deposit box, parang bangko.
Yes, Your
diba?
Honor.
But we now have an Iran war. And the Iran war has screwed up my income revenue stream, projected. So I know that in Q4, I won't be able to fund my 5 billion project. Kasi nakuha na ng unprogrammed yung 1 billion eh. So, I need 1.5. Correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
And government, as you just said, will make sure that program is implemented. This priority plan of the president.
Yes, Your Honor.
It will borrow.
Yes, Your Honor.
Therefore, it has an effect on the deficit. Yes?
Yes.
It has. And therefore, if you increase the unprogrammed and spend it, forcing you to borrow for programmed activities and projects, you are increasing the deficit.
If you're borrowing for the program, that should still be within the target deficit for the fiscal year.
No, my situation again is they are triggered both ways. You're putting it now to unprogrammed, and you can, per the language, because it's in the language.
Opo.
Pero nawalan ako ng 1.5 billion to finish my 5 billion sa program. Hihiram ako ng 1.5.
If I may clarify, Your Honor, what I spent for the unprogrammed was not considered in the BESF as a source of financing for the program.
But it was financing because of over-collections.
Yes, Your Honor.
Correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
So it could actually finance or fund my PAP in the program.
It could have resulted in a lower deficit if we used the excess collection.
Yes.
But it would not using it for UA would not necessarily increase the deficit.
Correct. Except that I have the Iran war and I have to borrow money to finish my 5 billion project. In that situation, the budget deficit is affected, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Adversely.
Yes, Your Honor.
So it is not accurate to say that unprogrammed appropriations are deficit neutral. Under the language of your special provisions, because your special provisions allow to fund unprogrammed appropriations for any increase in any item, as opposed to the total.
Yes,
If it
Your
were the
Honor.
total, I'll agree with you, it is neutral. But the way it is couched, the language, which allows me to use in any item an excess to fund UA, that makes it not neutral, right?
If I may clarify, Your Honor, looking at unprogrammed appropriations in isolation, it is deficit neutral.
Yes.
But-
But once triggered,
If we relate the possibility of using the excess revenue to fund programmed appropriations instead of borrowing, then that's the
it
time.
will lessen the budget, the deficit. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is the moment the trigger is triggered, it goes to UA. Then bahala na si Batman sa program.
In accordance with the GAA provisions as enacted by Congress, Your Honor.
So I guess that's where I'm coming from. I don't think it's accurate to say that unprogrammed appropriations are deficit neutral. In a situation where you have provisions in your GAA that allow you to take from any source, that has an effect on the deficit. Are we in agreement with that? You see, my problem, I'll be very candid with you. My problem is not unprogrammed appropriations as a concept. I totally agree with Congressman Salceda. And I also agree with Secretary Jokno. We need that, especially for foreign assisted projects, right? So my problem really is the triggers. Why are the triggers that way? They're creating artificial surpluses. So, again, my line of questioning is only to clarify, totoo nga bang walang epekto ang program? Parang hindi. Once matrigger. You're smiling, so I think you're saying yes?
Your Honor, if there's a basic concept on the executive end that when we propose the budget, considering we're in a deficit budget, when we propose the budget, the BESF already anticipates a certain level of borrowing and a certain level of deficit. So that's an accepted programmed amount in the BESF.
Correct. But if that happens and I earn more, why can't I use it for program? There's no law that says I cannot use it for program, right?
There's no law.
It will in fact decrease the deficit, correct?
It could, Your Honor.
But that's not what's happening. What's happening is the moment any of those triggers are triggered, UA.
In accordance with the special provisions, Your Honor.
Yes. So therefore, I'm not wrong in saying that there seems to be a choice already. That once one of those triggers get triggered, it goes to UA. And if I cannot fund my programmed appropriation, I have no choice but to borrow. And it will increase the deficit. I think that is what Chairman Solita Monsod was mentioning. It is increasing the budget deficit.
We have no choice but to borrow. But if it's in line with the programmed amount in the BSF, then it will be within the acceptable deficit programmed by the executive.
Okay, thank you.
Respectfully, Your Honor.
Thank you so much. I'll go to a different point. I think, thank you. This was mentioned also by the Solicitor General. In Araulio versus Aquino, again, per my reading, the court ruled that unprogrammed funds should consider the revenue targets as a whole, not individually. That was in Araulio decision. Okay. In the last oral arguments, you argued that the ruling was limited only to the 2011, 2012, and 2013 GAAs. Did I understand your argument correctly? Okay. So can we pull up the 2011, 2012, and 2013 GAAs? If you look at the language, of 2011, 2012, and 2013, they're talking totals only when the revenue collections exceed the original revenue targets, provided that collections arising from sources not considered may be used to cover releases from appropriations. This seems to be a more expansive language compared to the 2024, 2025, and 2026 GAAs, which specify any. Are we in agreement with that?
Yes, Your Honor. Beginning 2015,
Yes.
there was a change in the special provision on the trigger that there was an inclusion of the phrase in anyone.
Okay. But in the 2014 Araulio decision, government already was arguing that the way to read those provisions, which I flashed on the screen, is that excess in the revenue collection for a particular source. So given even the language of 2011, 2012, and 2013, the argument of government was, no, the correct way to understand that is collection for a particular source. I'm showing to you, can you bring up slide 32? There, I highlighted. That's a quote from Araulio versus Aquino. But the respondents understand the phrase to refer only to the collections for each source of revenue as enumerated in the BSF.
Yes, Your Honor. And that's why in the briefing to us, I think that was the reaction because of the interpretation of the Supreme Court in Araulio. In 2015, the trigger provision was revised.
But the trigger provision here talks about totals. And you revised it to make it more clear that it can be taken from specific.
in anyone because
Yes, but the Supreme Court in Araulio ruled against that.
Okay. Your Honor, may I clarify? I want to make a distinction between what was being interpreted by the Supreme Court in the Araulio, and that's why I try to draw the attention of the people that now the special provision trigger has a different articulation, and I would say in reaction to the interpretation of the court, and that's why they added the...
But that doesn't make sense to me. The language of 2011, 2012, and 2013 were clear. It's total.
May I clarify? Your Honor?
And then the respondents, government said, no, that's not how to read it, Supreme Court. You read it per source. And the Supreme Court said, no, it cannot be per source because you're going to screw up the budget because you're going to create artificial surpluses. And the reaction is to actually say that's a reaction that sidesteps. That's a reaction that's has already been debunked by the Supreme Court in this case. So I don't understand.
Your Honor, so we were also looking at the origin. Where was the artificial surplus mentioned? And I think it's coming from this case. And the reason why, to us, there is a big impact as to what we are now considering, we have to remember that this special provision is not a constitutional it's not a constitutional requirement. It is a statutory requirement that was being interpreted by the Supreme Court in Araulio. So here, it seems that the trigger is an excess in the total, and that's why the court interpreted it as then you have to wait for the total revenue projection.
That's not what Araulio said. That's not what Araulio... You're talking about the motion for recon?
Which was eventually what was decided on by the Supreme Court in the motion for reconsideration.
Okay. Can we bring up the pertinent portion of the Supreme Court decision on Araulio motion for recon? It's slide 35. That's the language. Based on the 2011, 2012, and 2013 GAAs, respondents contend that each source of revenue in the budget proposal must exceed. Accordingly, the court's ruling thereon nullified the intention of the authors. That was the argument of the respondents, the Solicitor General at the time. The ruling of the court says the respondents' contentions are without merit. Look at the next paragraph, which I highlighted. While we maintain the position that aggregate revenue collection must first exceed aggregate revenue target as a prerequisite to the use of unprogrammed funds, we clarify. So in other words, what the Supreme Court was clarifying was in the middle of the year, you can determine that already, whether total exceeds total. It was not a statement of the Supreme Court to say that we go back to interpreting specific sources. Specific. That's why I decided to put it on screen. It's clear as day as for me.
Your Honor, may I say the position of the respondents? So to us, the argument of the Solicitor General then was reflecting what was the interpretation also of the Executive and Congress. And since the wording is, it seems to refer only to the total, and that's why we accept wholeheartedly the interpretation of the Supreme Court in taking into consideration the total revenue and then determining if there is an excess. And that's why that is what I'm trying to explain, that impelled Congress to insert another phrase that in any one of the collection target, you can ascertain which has an excess, and you don't have to wait for the...
But counsel, the change in that language is precisely what the Supreme Court said you ought not to do, because it will create an artificial surplus. My takeaway from Araulio, and I guess I invite everybody here to read it, is number one, that the language of 2011, 2012, and 2013, as clear as it was, could not be interpreted the way the respondents were arguing. It had to be total. And number two, that if you were to interpret it as a specific source, any source, then you are creating a distortion. You are creating an artificial surplus. You are now impacting on the budget deficit. That's my takeaway from both the decision and the resolution. And it boggles my mind that you tell me that the reaction of Congress to a clear decision of the Supreme Court is to say the very thing that the Supreme Court said could not be done.
Your Honor.
That boggles the mind.
Yes, Your Honor, I perfectly understand where you are coming from. I am trying to explain the position of the respondents because the UAs were never intended to be funded by surpluses. They are the intention is to fund it with the excess in the target revenues, in the revenues that have been promised by the President to be met by government.
And then the Iran war happened, and I can't get that funding anymore.
Your Honor.
And yet, the excess I will use for UA, not PA.
Your Honor.
That's what I don't understand.
If I may, so there is also a contingent fund in the programmed appropriations.
No, but that's not what happened, right? What happened is na-prefer ang UA. For lack of a better word, no? Inuna ang UA.
Your Honor, the position of the respondents is that since they are sourced from different sources.
But they're not. My example says that they're not.
Okay. They refer to the same source, but the target that was submitted by the President and accepted by Congress as the source of financing is then also a definite. So if the target revenue is 1 billion and the government yields 1.2 billion, the 0.2 billion will then be a trigger for the unprogrammed appropriations. That is the humble submission of the respondents, Your Honor.
Again, let's agree to disagree. The decisions of the Supreme Court become part of the law of the land, right?
Correct, Your Honor.
And if my reading of the decision in Araujo is correct, then the only conclusion I have is that the language beginning 2014, 2015, they were in contravention of the Araujo ruling.
Again, it is my respectful submission, Your Honor, that we think that there is an impact to changing the word so that including the in any. The in any interpretation, the Supreme Court said that it is inappropriate if the wording of the trigger in the 2011 to 2013 is this way, because we were referring to the total. But if it is in any...
That seems to be such a very narrow reading of Araujo. Araujo was very specific to say that it should be totals because you do not want to create an artificial surplus. And that statement was in relation to the desire of government not to increase its deficit budget. So when you start saying that this is the language, but it could not have meant this, it could only mean this, and then you totally prescind from the effects on the budget, that seems to be such a selective way of reading things.
Your Honor, the position of the respondents is that what has been submitted by the President in the BESF when accepted by the Congress will be the level of the target revenues that are committed by government. And that's why if there is an excess, then that could be the source of funding for the standby appropriation. That is the position of the government.
Okay. Okay. Sorry, I only have a few questions left. Actually, I have 1,000 questions. But I'll ask them the next time. But for today, I just have a few more questions. Can I ask the DBM representative? These are just points of clarification I want to make.
We have the two representatives.
The one who was here.
Okay, thank you.
Your Honor.
Can you put on the slide section 5 of DBM Circular 581? Are you familiar with this, ma'am?
I can read through it, Your Honor.
Clarificatory guidelines and procedures applicable to foreign-assisted projects following the cash budgeting system and Treasury single account framework. That's the title. I'm assuming you're familiar with it?
Fairly, Your Honor.
Fairly or very?
Fairly, Your Honor.
Fairly, okay. It has 5.1 and 5.2. These are just points to clarify. My understanding of 5.1 is that it refers to new FAPs that are ready for implementation as of the cutoff date indicated in the budget call. Is my understanding correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
And since they are ready for implementation, it means that as of the date indicated in the budget call, they have already undergone the rigorous evaluation process mentioned by Secretary Jokno last time, namely pre-feasibility study, feasibility study, detailed engineering, review of the internal rate of return threshold, and a certain source of financing for these new FAPs.
Yes, Your Honor.
That's correct?
That's
Okay.
correct.
So our spending authority for this type of FAP is no longer contingent on anything.
No, Your Honor.
All right. So as an example, can you put lang on the slide? This is the example I find. That's the Metro Manila Subway Project Phase 1, which is part of the appropriations for the Department of Transportation under the 2026 GAA. This is under programmed appropriations, correct?
I have to verify that, Your Honor.
I'm telling you already.
Okay.
Okay.
Your
It's in program. So here you have a source of funding. The loan has been approved. Nothing else needs to be done. Therefore, nasa program siya.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, going back to Budget Circular 581, Section 5.2, they refer to FAPs that, while already approved or scheduled to be approved by the ICC and NEDA, they are not yet implementation ready as of the cutoff date indicated in the budget call. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, Your Honor.
And these programs, they will be evaluated by the DBM for inclusion in the unprogrammed.
For possible inclusion, yes.
So
Your
much
Honor.
so that when the contract is finally approved in the middle of the year, for example, then meron ka ng budget authority to spend.
Yes, Your Honor.
And that's the whole concept
The
about
efficiency,
standby.
Your Honor.
Correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Everybody, I keep hearing on the news that everybody says, why don't we just file a supplemental budget? How long does a supplemental budget take?
It will go through the same process as the General Appropriations Act, Your Honor.
And in your experience, how many months will this take?
Maybe 3 to...
Your Honor, we sampled special appropriation laws. The average, I think, is 50 days. It can also it can be longer, but the average that we got was like 50 days, and it goes through the 50.
That includes already deliberations in Congress?
Yes, Your Honor.
So 2 months.
On average.
And in those 2 months na hindi ko ma-implement yung FAP because it's pending legislation, which can be extended, right? Because of everything under the sun. And in those 2 months, what happens to the contract? Do I incur any fees?
If there are delays, there could be commitment fees, Your Honor.
How much are we talking about?
I would defer to my colleague on the specific
Let's have a ballpark figure. How much are we talking about?
1/4 of 1%.
1/4 of 1%.
I am listening to my previous secretaries, Your Honor.
In projects that are huge, that 1/4 of 1% will be big.
Yes, Your Honor.
We're talking millions?
Billions, Your Honor.
Billions. Because I'm
Sometimes.
going through the legislative mill that will take me 2 months to process. In the meantime, I incur billions in terms of commitment fees.
Yes, Your Honor.
And that goes into the wisdom of UAs,
The efficiency of UA.
the efficiency of UAs. Okay. So given my understanding of 5.1 and 5.2 to be correct, can you confirm that for the 2026 GAA, the FAPs listed there under unprogrammed are only those that are referred to in 5.2?
I would have to double check the data, Your Honor.
Okay. So, yeah, let me end there. Because I noticed that 2024, 2025, and 2026, this phrase support to foreign assisted projects, they're packaged differently. 2024 has an itemization, 2025 has none, 2026 has no listing. So I want to make sure that when we say support to foreign assisted projects in the 2026 GAA, they are those that are just waiting for the loan to be approved. That they do not include FAPs that are already ready for implementation. Can you submit that?
I would not be in the position to because the GAA is the product of legislative authorization, Your Honor.
Who will be in a position to?
Maybe the Congress, Your Honor.
Counsel, are you representing Congress as well?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, so can you give that?
Your Honor, I was thinking ahead. Can you please say
Okay.
again your question?
Homework.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I need an itemization of the projects for 2024, 2025, and 2026 under the term support to foreign assisted projects. I need to see the name of the project, the total project cost, including the breakdown of the loan proceeds, and the GOP counterpart. And when you give me that list, tell me where in the GAA I find them so that I can look at the GAA and check. All right?
We
So I
will
want to know whether they're in the programmed or unprogrammed or whether they're both there.
We will comply, Your Honor.
Okay. And then, number 2, I want to know or a clarification on whether or not the GOP peso counterpart for any FAP in the GAAs of 2024, 2025, and 2026 was included under any line item or under any item in the unprogrammed appropriations. I want to know whether or not the GOP counterpart is being put in unprogrammed or whether it is in program. Because if it is in program, it eats up, I think, what Secretary Butch likes to call fiscal space, di ba? So I'd like to know where they are.
We will comply, Your Honor.
All right. Can you also indicate which foreign assisted projects we are paying commitment fees to for this year, 2024, 2025, 2026?
We
And
will
how-
get the information.
And how much?
We will get the information, Your Honor.
Okay. That will be all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Justice Ben. Justice Ramon Paul Hernando will conduct his interpellation.
Thank you, Chief Justice. My question